Mercedes expansion valves, how they work, and the two different types. So an expansion valve is what helps regulate the pressures on your air conditioning system. If you have a healthy compressor and no blockages in the system and no green goo floating around, the expansion valve is ultimately what controls what happens. And one of the reasons that expansion valves are so important is because the difference between the suction side of the system and the high pressure side of the system has to be regulated. And the expansion valve provides that regulation, so low side pressures in a full system function between 40 and 50. Actually, I should say between 30 and 50. And high side pressures function between 180 and 250. And if you have a bad expansion valve, even if your system is fully charged, your compressor is working, if you have an expansion valve issue, even if your compressor is fully functional and your system is fully charged and everything is working great, you will not have any cold air. So, let's start. Now, the earliest type of expansion valve is the Orifice type expansion valve. And these expansion valves were used on all Mercedes up until the 123 series came out. And they continued to be used in the 107 until the end of production. Now, there are two types of these expansion valves. There are versions that have the capillary tube, which acts as sort of a pressure equalizer. And then there are versions that do not have the capillary tube. And we're going to talk about both types of expansion valves and what happens with them. So, as you can see, you have a fairly large inlet. This is actually the suction side inlet. And then you have the small side, which is the high pressure inlet. And in here is where the pressure modulation occurs. You have a thermostat that is thermoreactive that opens and closes in here to modulate the pressures based on outside temperature. And you have a temperature feeler that attaches to the cold side or suction side of the evaporator using an external temperature probe, not an internal one, such as the later ones do, an external one, that helps adjust this position. Now, what happens to these valves is that they can get blocked on the suction side, because remember, what happens is they can get blocked on the high pressure side, because what happens is the compressor pushes through here and sucks through here. And so, of course, that can happen, but more so than anything, they can lose their ability to move. Now, this was a new old stock valve made by Eaton. Eaton is an OEM manufacturer of, among other things, Mercedes Benz climate control parts. Items like transmissions and other major electrical systems and four-wheel drive parts also come out of Eaton, but their thermo division made and continues to make a lot of parts for Mercedes. However, the best brand of expansion valve, as long as we're not talking about a Chinese part, is Egelhoff, which is a French company. So, this Eaton valve was a new old stock valve that I put in my friend Pete's 280 SE. And what happened was, after working great for a few weeks, it stopped allowing enough Freon to pass through here, causing plummeting low side pressures between 0 and 10 psi, which is simply too low. Plummeting low side AC pressures cause two problems. One, it causes too much high side buildup, which can endanger the health of the compressor. And number two, you don't have enough Freon circulating through the evaporator, which means that no cold air can build up because you just have blockage and no movement, or you have suction on the other side and no Freon. The expansion valve has to allow enough Freon to build up in the evaporator so that when the process or transition from high to low pressure happens, the Freon molecules grow closer together and they get super cold. That's right, Jesse, right? Molecules closer together, colder, molecules farther apart, hotter. Right? Is it the opposite?
Yeah.
When
the molecules expand apart, liquid to gas, things cool down.
How does ice work then?
Ice, when ice turns from a liquid to a solid, the heat comes out of the ice and the ice freezes.
Because the molecules contract.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Saying under low pressure, the molecules contract. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I just had to make sure. I mean, I have somebody here to check me, you know. Anyway, the back to where we were. So, with or without the cap tube, they function about the same way. Sometimes aftermarket valves do work. We have used them. They seem to be fine. I just hate using Chinese products because I am anti-Chinese manufacturing. In case anybody knows, I like quality, not cheapness. Okay, now let's look at the expansion block. The expansion block came into use on the 123 series, then the 126. It was never used in the 107 or the 116. Eventually, a version was adapted for the 124, the 201, and the 140, which has a little stud on the end that the lines bolt up to. But this is a very rare 123, 830, 1184 expansion block. And then this is the version for a 126, but this is an aftermarket one that I have sitting on my shelf that I'm probably going to throw away after this presentation because, as you see, it doesn't even have a temperature feeler on it. You know, this is the difference between a good unit and a cheap unit. Now, these things don't fail that often, but what happens is the temperature feeler inside becomes stupid. So they don't plug, they just quit moving effectively, so you don't get as much pressure differentiation as you would need under certain circumstances. The other problem with these is that they leak. They tend to leak from here at this temperature sensing element in the end. And that's no exception for the Egelhoff valves. Now, Singer used to make these valves as well, and they had an O-ring in the end also. And the Singer valves leaking led to many evaporator misdiagnoses on 126s. So I always say on a 126 or 123, check here for leaks. If you see green oil on the end of this valve, you have a leak. Simple as that, you replace it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this segment on the expansion valves and what they do. In our next video, we're going to talk about where the expansion valves are located in your Mercedes. So stay tuned for part 2. In the meantime, like, share, subscribe, tap the bell for notifications. Leave us an applause if you really enjoyed the video and leave your comments below. If you have a question, feel free to contact me. And for those of you that have asked for help through Patreon, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to work with you. In the meantime, don't be afraid to get your AC working again, and don't forget about the expansion valve.